I'm James Rule. Welcome to the Lonely Leader podcast, where we help existing and aspiring leaders find clarity, build resilience, drive performance, and enhance fulfillment. I'm talking today about psychological safety and why I believe it is an X factor for creating and sustaining high performance within your team. So I'm going to talk about what it is, warning signs which suggest that you don't have it in your team, why I believe psychological safety is a necessity, why it is so important to each and every individual in your organization. And last, I will articulate some simple steps that you can implement as a leader to ensure that you are creating and maintaining psychological safety within your team. So what is psychological safety? Well, it is a shared belief held by members of a team that they will not be punished, ridiculed, or embarrassed for speaking up and sharing their opinion. That is the most succinct and articulate definition that I can provide. In terms of warning signs, these are some of the classic indicators that, irrespective of how good you believe your culture might be, the working environment might be, these are some of those warning signs that suggest that perhaps you do not have psychological safety. First and foremost, groupthink, a blind sense of obedience and support for the leader, even though there are better alternatives available. Now, initially, on my journey as a leader, as a CEO, when everybody's nodding in an agreement, you can be deluded into thinking, well, I'm a great leader. I have all the right answers, all the right strategies, and therefore all of my leadership team are agreeing. Now, on occasion, that's absolutely valid. There are multiple times when you're going to present something and people agree and say, yep, that sounds like the right plan, let's move forward. However, my caveat would be if nobody ever challenges, puts forward a counter opinion, then that is when there's a danger that you are just creating a group of yes men or women that feel they just have to go with your plan, irrespective whether they believe it is the right course of action. Another indicator which ties into groupthink is radio silence. If you do actively ask for opinions and there is silence in the room, that's not a healthy place. That even when you try and solicit feedback from your team, for whatever reason, and most likely they fear having a counter opinion to you as their leader, or the consequences, or the pushback, or the criticism, or the alienation that they believe they will experience, perhaps from you personally as their leader, or from their peers in the meeting in which they are present. So if you ask for opinions and you get radio silence, there's another key warning sign. Now, the third warning sign to look out for is apathy. When members of a team start to become apathetic, they're not sharing feedback, they're not making suggestions because they develop this view that, well, what's the point? Leadership doesn't value our opinion, so what's the point of putting the time and effort in to make suggestions? And that is truly cancerous for organizational culture. Once people become apathetic, then they become complacent and nobody is optimizing their performance anymore. So hard to spot, but if you do keep your eyes and ears open, then it becomes easier and easier. And perhaps it's not always immediately apparent to you, but you need some trusted generals in your leadership team, people that also have their eyes and ears open, and they need to feel psychologically safe to come forward and say, hey, look, there's some warning signs of apathy developing here. They all tie together. And it's interesting, there was a study I read by the McChrystal group, and they suggested a statistic, which is quite alarming, that only 37% of leaders actually seek out counter views, alternative views. So Going back to my earlier point of radio silence, that is a warning sign. But in many cases, in fact, the majority, leaders are not even asking, not even providing the opportunity for people to step forward and suggest an alternative idea or a tweak to the strategy that the leader is proposing. So, as with all the content we share on the Lonely Leader podcast, I would love you to be reflecting as you hear these points and position them with your team. Start to think, do I have radio silence in the team? Do I just get blind obedience? Do I ever ask for counter opinions? If I do ask, am I greeted with radio silence? So, why do we need to ensure that psychological safety exists within our teams? I'm going to run through a handful of points now that I hope will articulate that point. Number one, creating a sense of value in your people. In a previous episode, I've talked at length about why it is imperative for your people to feel valued. And if you create a sense of psychological safety, to have done that, you have invested in people, you've created the right environment, and you will enhance their sense of value. Conversely, when that's not in place, you are eroding that. If people do not feel comfortable speaking up because they fear ridicule or being embarrassed or negative consequences of having the audacity to try and suggest a counter opinion, then naturally that is going to be very, very effective at eroding their sense of value. Secondly, innovation. No leader is an island. No one leader can have all of the best ideas, the perfect strategy. And to think that is delusional. You want to be able to be in a constant feedback loop with your team, suggesting ideas, iterations, tweaks to existing concepts and strategy. And you close off the tap to that source of innovation. Your people are a wonderful set of eyes and ears, an invaluable resource to contribute to the continued growth of your strategy and by default your organization. So by truly fostering psychological safety, that feedback loop is running continually. People are giving and taking ideas all of the time. The third important factor is growth. Most of us have the essential human need of wanting to feel that we are growing and progressing in all aspects of our life. That could be learning a new skill, a language, getting fit, getting healthy. Our work and our professional role is no different. We want a sense of being able to grow and progress. And if you don't feel as though you can contribute, if you don't feel as though you can ask questions, then you are stifling that growth. And ultimately, that compromises people's performance and it compromises their willingness to remain a part of a team or a specific organization. Conversely, when you're in an environment where you can ask questions, you feel safe, you feel able to do that, then it's a huge acceleration of your growth. And I remember being in my late teens, I was probably 18 or 19 when I first stepped into the world of professional rugby union. And I walked into a dressing room at Newcastle Falcons that in the time before the salary cap was just a who's who of international class players. It was wall to wall, people who had played in World Cups, who had played in any number of international games. And it was pretty intimidating for a young, inexperienced individual that I was to step into that environment. But I will be forever grateful that the leaders, the senior players in that organization, the real superstars, were immensely welcoming. We went on really long road trips, traveling to fixtures all around the United Kingdom. And I would be welcome to sit with different individuals, and no question was a daft question. You know, many of these people were 10, 12, 13 years older, significantly more life experience and also professional sporting experience. And it was fascinating to be able to learn from them, to be able to ask questions. And never once did I feel that by asking those questions or engaging with them, that I would be embarrassed or ridiculed as a consequence. And that was my first real insight into how important psychological safety is for high performance. They helped me develop as a young man and as a player, and it's something I took forward into my professional leadership roles and made a core component of my philosophy when I became a chief executive. The next point is minimizing the damage of mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. You and I, all of us. And therefore, it's completely reasonable to expect that members of your team are going to make mistakes. Now, the one thing we need to ensure happens when mistakes are made, that they are quickly flagged, the damage can be minimized, the learning can immediately begin for that individual to ensure they don't make the same mistake twice. The last thing you want is for members of your team to try and double down on their mistake, to try and resolve it themselves, to not flag it with the relevant superior or colleague for fear of ridicule. Because in that elongated period, the damage to them as an individual, to you as their leader, to the organization could be growing dramatically. So you want an environment where people feel that they can speak up, and especially so when something's gone wrong. The next point I want to raise of why psychological safety is so important is it enhances your resource. Now, this is very, very topical because I invariably find that with every individual I work with, they would dearly love some additional resource. The sort of points that are pushed back to me are if I could just have slightly more headcount, if I could have one or two new members of staff in this team, it would make the world a difference. If I could just have a little bit more marketing budget or resource for this particular strategy. And that's totally understandable. We all want more team members, more staff, more resource. However, the pushback that I always present to individuals when I'm working with them as a coach or a mentor is, can you genuinely, hand on heart, say that you have fully optimized the resource that you currently have under your leadership, whether that's individuals and their performance or the allocation of financial resource into strategies and systems? And in reality, very few of us can. So here is something that is often hidden in plain sight in organizations. If you are not creating psychological safety, you are not getting the best out of your team. Therefore, it has to become of significant importance to go out and take the steps to create it, because you will get so much more from your existing resource. And when you can optimize the performance of your existing team, invariably it's as good as, if not better, than bringing in a new face, a new member of staff that doesn't understand the systems and the culture, that's going to take a long time to get up to speed. So lazy thinking is, I need more resource, I need more people. A more readily available strategy is, I need to get more out of what I already have. Retention is the next important factor when you create psychological safety. It's hard to find good people. It's hard to ensure that they're the right cultural fit, to bring them into your system, to onboard them, develop them, and bring them up to the level you need to be a high performer in the organization. It is far easier to retain the good people you already have, to facilitate their continued growth and development, and to develop a long-serving team that know each other instinctively, that work well together, and that are moving the organization forward. And yet, too often, we become complacent in taking existing people for granted, and we're always thinking about new hires, new blood into the team, etc. So it ties in to my previous point, but when you genuinely create psychological safety, you create a highly motivated, highly valued group and set of individuals who want to continue working for you. And it makes your life much easier as a leader to have a well-established, long-serving group who understand you and you understand them. And last but not least, you can't help but put a nod towards culture. People often say that talk's cheap, and that actions speak louder than words. And as you've heard me say in previous podcasts, you can flood your office walls with mantras and mission statements. It's all just words if the actions are not aligned. And people talk. People talk about toxic cultures. People start to leave. People talk about where they've gone. And often they take high performers with them to a new organization. And conversely, if you are that environment that's a high performing organization with an inclusive culture that people really enjoy being a part of, then people talk about that and they will help retain people, but they will also help attract people to you. So for me, creating psychological safety is one of those essential building blocks to creating an empowering culture that people want to be a part of and don't want to leave. I'll wrap up this episode by talking about some of the simple but fundamental steps that any one of us can take to start creating and maintaining psychological safety within a team. First and foremost, active listening. You've got to practice it as a leader and encourage your team to do the same. Demonstrate that ideas and opinions are valued. I think this is something that sport does particularly well, and industry is still lagging a long way behind. And before I expand that analogy, I'll just share the second point, which is articulate expectations. As a leader, you have to ensure that everybody has clarity of their role and responsibilities and ensure that they are actively encouraged to contribute. So going back to the sport versus business analogy, it doesn't matter whether you are a seasoned veteran that's played 150 times for your team or a young, inexperienced debutant who's played one game. The environment that the best coaches create ensure that everybody's opinion is valued and everybody is encouraged to contribute. It's a simple but extremely powerful way to encourage psychological safety. It doesn't mean that everybody's opinion automatically becomes part of the strategy or game plan, but everybody critically has a right to contribute, to dissect, to discuss how they could improve on the existing plan and the existing performance. Now, that takes me into the third point, which is collaboration. No leader is an island, as I've said many, many times before. You have to ensure that you develop the collaborative teamwork within your team. So it's imperative that you ensure that your team are collaborating, that there isn't just one dominant voice that brings a team together and says, this is what we're doing, let's all get on with it. So in the same way that you must actively listen, you must ensure that your senior leaders and your strong, dominant personalities are actively listening and helping facilitate collaboration throughout the wider business as well. Number 4, manage mistakes. You've got to establish the lessons from the mistakes, share them widely within the team, and ensure that the mistake is not repeated. But crucially, not waste time, energy, or destroy culture by throwing people under the proverbial bus, by criticizing individuals. Once people recognize and can clearly see that, yes, mistakes are identified, yes, mistakes will be shared for the greater good of the organization to ensure that they are not repeated, but that they are not used as a mechanism for lambasting individuals for embarrassing them, then you create that psychological safety where people will come forward and you are far more effective in managing the potential fallout of any mistakes. Linking into that, the next point is celebrate success. Weak leaders are quick to apportion blame and slow to praise. You must reverse that trend and ensure that you take any and all opportunity to praise individuals either directly to them or to the wider group, team, or organization. Again, you don't want to be that individual that is constantly micromanaging, criticizing, and lambasting people for poor performance, because that is no way to get the best out of people. Yes, you have to identify and manage mistakes, as we've alluded to, but it's really important not to take good performance and success for granted, and to just pause and take a moment to express recognition and thanks. And lastly, a key point to recognize is to support the underperformer. If somebody's made a mistake, or if somebody is struggling, any member of a team, even the most seasoned operators and the most successful operators in a team, can experience a dip in form. It may be that there are challenges taking place for them away from work. So an effective leader, it ties back into the active listening, needs to be able to identify what is the root cause for that underperformance, and to provide whatever additional support, mentoring, training, or perhaps even some time away to recharge and refresh. But whatever is required, it's important to be able to support the underperformer. So I hope this episode has been useful. We've covered what psychological safety is, the warning signs to look out for, why it's so important to you as a leader in your organization, and some of the simple steps you can take to encourage collaboration. But if there was one overriding message to leave you with, is do not fear people having counter opinions or suggestions to your ideas. Initially, it's very easy for your ego to come to the fore and to feel defensive, or to feel that your ideas are under attack when somebody has a counter opinion. But if you can park your ego and say, no, this is exactly what I need. I've got strong, intellectual, high-performing individuals around me. I intend to listen to their views. I intend to embrace them, and where necessary, I will adapt my thinking and my strategy. And on other occasions, I will duly note them, but still proceed. That is a healthy place to be, and a far more effective way to create high performance in your organization than operating under the deluded notion that you and only you have all the ideas, and therefore any counter opinion is a personal attack that needs to be stamped out and eliminated from the business. Thanks for listening to the Lonely Leader podcast. I'd be very grateful if you could share and follow if the content resonates. And if you're looking for additional free resource to support your continued growth and development, then please do check out our social media and website details in the show notes. Remember, quality leadership on the outside must always start within.